Brian Regan is a legendary stand-up comedian who is bringing that talent here to Austin this weekend, performing at ACL Live at the Moody Theater this Sunday, January 28th. For more info and the few tickets that do remain, go to acllive.com. Brian, thank you so much for the time. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am good, and I have to tell you that I am pretty impressed with what you are putting yourself through right now. You are doing 6 Texas cities in 6 days, starting in El Paso. You're in Lubbock right now as we speak on Wednesday just before noon. You're heading to Irving, Houston, and then Austin here on Sunday night at ACL Live at the Moody Theater. My goodness, man, you are getting a great taste of what this state has to offer culture-wise.
Yes, and I'm doing Southwest Texas, Northeast Texas. I'm doing the whole Texas thing, and the El Paso show last night was fun, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the week.
You're in Lubbock right now. Is anything standing out to you about Lubbock, Texas? I know you're on a tour bus right now, but have you ducked your head out to see what Lubbock has to offer the people?
I wish I was adventurous enough to say, well, yeah, I got up at 5 in the morning. I did my usual 1 hour run, and then I went and checked out all the sights of Lubbock. I have nothing to offer. I can only tell you what I can see out the window here, and I see like a big propane tank and a dumpster. I'm not suggesting that Lubbock doesn't have more to offer. I'm just saying that that's all I can see from my perspective.
I went to school at Texas Tech for a year and a half. Lubbock doesn't have much more to offer than that. Just be glad that the wind is not blowing from east to west, because at that point you start to smell the slaughterhouses on the outskirts of town.
Well, I'll consider myself fortunate for the moment.
There you go. And doing some prep for this interview, I listened to a couple of other interviews that you've done over time, and that included the conversation you had with Neil Brennan last year. Great conversation, by the way. A big fan of Neil. But during that conversation, you had talked about constantly making the effort to redefine yourself, to not become stagnant with how you are going about putting together an hour for your stand-up comedy, which you've been so good at for so long now. Is there a general theme or general idea that is behind the current hour that you're rolling out for the people here in Texas and beyond?
I don't know about a general theme. I think that's one thing that I've always liked about stand-up comedy is that you don't have to have a theme to it. Like, you can put together a bunch of different thoughts and ideas and string them all together and call them a comedy show. And that's one thing I love about it. I mean, I've got jokes about guns that I'm putting in, which might surprise people. I've got jokes about mundane stuff too, Barbie dolls and how kids walk them. And, I talk about a wide variety of things, and then I just try to string it together, and hopefully people come away enjoying it.
I think that's something that people may not realize who just knows you as this guy who's really funny, who doesn't cuss. It's not like you're not touching on taboo topics at times. You're just not using blue language in the process. It doesn't mean that you're not taking chances and you're not going places that may cause somebody who doesn't know any better, or somebody who, quite frankly, probably doesn't belong at a comedy show to gasp in horror that you're saying something like that out loud into a microphone.
I very much appreciate you saying that, because one of the challenges of doing comedy the way I like to do it is that if people hear, I know you didn't use the word clean, but a lot of times people use the word clean to define what I do. And if somebody just hears that word but doesn't know or watch what I do, they can have the wrong connotation of what it is that I'm doing. I'm not doing a kiddie show. I'm not on stage, twisting balloon animals for, you could bring a teenage kid, but it's, I like to think that it's more interesting than other people might think it is because of the word clean.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I've got a 9 and 7-year-old at home right now, and I'm considering, because they know how big of a fan of stand-up I am and how big of a nerd I am, just to get to talk to all different types of comedians. It's like, what would be the right time and the right type of comedian to try and introduce them to the art form? They're still clearly way too young for just about any comic. Maybe Gallagher might work, some of his stuff from the 1980s or early 90s. But in terms of like the type of stand-up comedy that I enjoy, got to be at least teenagers. But even then, like the stuff that I'm watching and listening to and laughing at, there's a certain worldly awareness that comes into play, and also an experience in this world that makes a lot of what you and plenty of others talk about something that's worth laughing at for the audience.
Yeah, I agree. I like the fact that people out there can feel like they can bring their kids. I'm not going to say anything that you're going to have to cover your kids' ears. Like I'm not going to go, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have brought, our 9-year old to the show. But at the same time, the 9-year old is probably not going to be getting into a lot of what I'm talking about just because of what you're talking about. It's like you have to have lived some life to understand what certain comedy jokes are about. I mean, I like to do some stuff that kids would enjoy, but I also am trying to do stuff that, 60, 70-year-old people can enjoy too. I did a show one time and a family came backstage after the show, including their grandmother. She was like in her 80s maybe, and they had like grandkids. There was the whole gamut. And they were all being very nice. We were taking pictures, and the grandmother said to me, "So how long have you been in vaudeville?" I'm like, wow, vaudeville. I guess since 1910. I don't know how to answer that question, but and her kids were going, "Grandma, it's not vaudeville. He's not doing vaudeville."
Well, I guess that means that you're not going to be able to tell her about doing stand up in whorehouses back in the late 1800s. Then either, huh?
You're right. Right. She had the wrong notion.
One other thing that you talked about with Neil Brennan that I'm in complete agreement with you on is having a sort of line anxiety. And you talk about the need for lines to be clearly marked and fair. I just have a general abhorrence to lines, Brian, because I don't know how much is actually worth standing in a long line for. Like, people love standing in lines here in Austin for really good barbecue. Well, look, I get that. I've eaten at a lot of those places. The barbecue is really good, but there's places here in town where the barbecue is just as good that doesn't require you to wait in a line. Now, you can't get as far as saying that there's like a basic courtesy or a lack of etiquette that comes into play with people when it comes to lines, or somebody just walking up on, let's say, a counter at an airline or something where there's a line of people and it's like, hey, I just need help with this really quickly. It's like, actually, all of us just need help pretty quickly. What do you think it'll take for society to return to a sort of etiquette and courtesy that seems to have just completely vanished over the last 15 to 20 years?
I don't know. I would hope that, you know, that human behavior can have a pendulum aspect to it. Like maybe it can get so unfair and out of control that people as a whole start going, hey, why don't we be nicer and kinder again? Um, I remember years ago, Carol Burnett and gosh darn it, I'm blanking on the other actor's name. They went on a talk show circuit trying to get people to be nicer. It was a short-lived thing. Who's the guy in Midnight Run? The not Robert De Niro, but the
Charles Grodin.
Charles Grodin.
Yeah.
It was Charles Grodin and Carol Burnett did a talk show circuit. Like they would go on the Tonight Show and different shows, and their whole message was that people are getting out of line and they should start to be nicer and kinder to each other. And I remember thinking, this is an interesting tour that they're on. Like they weren't plugging anything, they weren't plugging a movie, they weren't doing anything other than trying to get people to be nice. And I remember thinking, this is pretty cool that they're trying to take this on. I don't know how successful they were, but the effort was to be commended. And I personally think that etiquette needs a resurgence. People kind of stop considering etiquette in this world, because for a while it was like people thought it had to do with like plates and, you know, what fork do you use and what cup do you use and that sort of thing. And people go, this is ridiculous. Who cares about this stuff? Well, it's not so much that. It's how we are with each other that's important. And I think, especially with technology and phones and all of this stuff, I really think that there's a place for people to be a lot more interested and concerned about etiquette and how we are with each other and how we care about each other and how we love each other. And you know, I'm hoping that the pendulum gets, if it gets so bad that people will want to improve how they are.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it, because the pendulum almost always, I don't want to say always because nothing is that binary, but the pendulum almost always swings back in the other direction. Like the hyper cancer culture for a hyper cancel culture from a few years ago. It does seem like, in large part because stand-up comedy has become so much more popular, has swung in a different direction now, where people aren't quite as sensitive as they were 5, 6, 7 years ago. But that pendulum will eventually swing too far in the other direction, where maybe we need to be a little bit more sensitive about those things. Maybe we get that with manners too. But then again, the tour that you're talking about, my assumption is that was from the late 70s or early 1980s, where it felt a whole lot easier to have a sort of civil discourse. And I think a lot of people now, because of the social media element of things, they just get accustomed to saying really ugly stuff to one another without real consequences, without trying to sit down and discuss your differences. And that's not to say that you talking to somebody about an issue that they may feel differently about is going to change their mind. But in the end, maybe both of you understand where the other is coming from a little bit more. And that right there means there's going to be more of a basic level of respect that you're hopefully treating one another with going forward too.
There's a lot of ugliness in social media, and it's unfortunate. And I equate it to people being in their cars. You know, when you're in your car, you're much more likely to honk at somebody because you know that you really don't have to get out of the car and talk to each other. So you can honk and make your point. Whereas if you were face to face with the person, you'd probably be a little bit nicer under the circumstance. Not that you don't have a point to be upset or angry, but you'd probably handle it differently. I feel social media is like honking. People are just honking on their Twitter and their Facebook, honking at things that they don't like or don't care about. Whereas the person that they might be directing that to, if they met them at a party, they might like the person. They might want to have a cocktail and have a laugh and maybe disagree. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with disagreeing, but can't we like each other? Can't we disagree and still like each other?
A friend equated social media to a digital bathroom wall where people just write the ugliest stuff on that wall. And, you know, it's up to us to decide whether or not we want to read it. There's far too many people, though, who seems like they are sticking their eyes into those digital glory holes, and they're surprised or upset by what they find in return, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's hope the pendulum swings back. And I know how to say pendulum because I did the Bill Burr podcast a few years ago and I said pendulum, and he said Regan, I think it's pendulum. So I've been pronouncing it correctly ever since.
Congratulations. Hey, speaking of parties, I was listening to Chad Daniels and Kelsey Cook's podcast that they put out a couple weeks ago. Apparently you are the darts champion from their New Year's Eve party. Congratulations on this honor.
Yeah, I didn't know that they were talking about it on the podcast. I'd have to listen to it, but they threw a beautiful party at their home. My girlfriend and I were there. They had a lot of Minneapolis area comedians, and it was a lot of fun. And they included a big dart competition, darts, you know, and I was the last man standing. And so it's my claim to fame. Now, when I get introduced on, you know, everybody's looking for credits when they get introduced. Please welcome the dart champion from the Chad Daniels Kelsey Cook party. Here he comes, Brian Regan.
And did I hear correctly that you actually have a trophy that you can show off too?
Yes. Well, I won that night, and then the next day I texted Chad just to be nice to say, "Hey, we had a great time at the party last night." And just to be playful, I said, "Should I come by to pick up the darts trophy, or are you going to ship it to me?" Just being playful. And then that night was his party was the night before New Year's Eve. Then New Year's Eve night, a bunch of comedians went to the Acme Comedy Club in Minneapolis, and he said, "I've got something for you." And he and Kelsey gave me this big, it's like a big Delta airplane model that was at their house. And he wrote on there, "Brian Regan darts champion." And yeah, it was really funny. It was funny that he followed through on the gag, and it meant a lot to me that they did that.
And watching your comedians in cars getting coffee with Jerry, I think it was the second time you were on that show. At the end of that episode, you said something that I think is so profound. You were talking about getting butterflies in your stomach and how butterflies are important. It shows that you are feeling something. It shows that you care. I think you called butterflies memory makers. I thought that was so poetic how you put that. I'm curious though, outside of stand-up comedy, or I guess assuming that you do still get butterflies and you perform stand-up comedy, what else gives you butterflies right now in your life, Brian?
I have some other projects that I'm working on that are not stand-up comedy oriented, like new things for me. Um, I'm in a TV series called Loudermilk, which is getting new life. It just got moved to Netflix, and it's one of the top-rated TV shows on Netflix. Peter Farrelly is a co-creator. This show gave me an opportunity for myself to see if I could act, and I'm getting some good comments about it. And so it's like a whole new thing career-wise for me to, as much as I love stand-up, I mean, I love doing stand-up comedy, but to be able to act is a big thing for me. So that gives me butterflies. It gives me butterflies before I'm shooting a scene, wondering if I'm going to be able to pull it off. And I have a wonderful woman in my life, and she gives me butterflies.
That's important. I can't speak to the woman in your life, but I'm about 4 or 5 episodes into Loudermilk. Livingston is great in that show. Obviously, you do a bang up job too, though. Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. They gave my character is Muggsy,
Mhm.
and in season one, they really only had one little storyline. I don't say little. They had like one storyline about Muggsy, maybe two. Season two, they gave me a lot more, and then season three, they really laid a lot of stuff on me, a lot of heavy emotional stuff. In fact, when I read it, I was like, I don't know who they think I am. Why do they think I can pull this off? And it was one of those things where I better, because I'm a piece of a pie in this bigger show. I can't fail. I have to do I have to do as a good enough job to pull this off. And I'd like to say I think I did, but it was a whole new experience for me. So being able to act, funny story. They shot each season is 10 episodes.
Mhm.
So they shot it like a movie though. Each season we shot all 10 episodes like kind of at the same time.
Mhm.
So you don't necessarily shoot everything in the correct order, you might shoot a scene from episode 4, and then that afternoon you're shooting a scene from episode 1. So you have to keep everything in your mind of what your character knows or doesn't know at that time. And you get the script ahead of time, which they call the Bible. The Bible just means the entire script. I didn't know this term. And I asked Peter Farrelly one time, I said, "Hey, in this scene," he's the director and co-creator, I said, "In this scene coming up, do I already know such and such happened?" And he said, "Well, have you read the Bible?" I was like, wow, not in a while. Uh, which part of the Bible should I like reread to know how to handle this next scene? And he meant, of course, the Loudermilk Bible.
So what allowed you to ultimately unlock some emotional places or some vulnerability that you were at least at the start a little bit concerned about in season 3?
I don't know. There are a lot of people who, you mentioned Rodden Livingston.
Yeah.
He is an incredible actor. He's the lead. He plays Loudermilk in the series, Ron Livingston. And I watched him every take, even takes that weren't used, even when camera's not on him. Every moment was 100% believable when I watched him. I saw one scene that he did where I thought he was a little off track, only one. And he stopped like after 15 seconds and said, cut, let me get on track. And then the next take, he was right back at 100%. So I only saw one scene. Whereas me, I mean, they say that there are certain actors who don't take notes. You know, they don't want notes because they feel they're gifted enough where they will decide for themselves. They don't want a director coming up to them. I need notes. Give me notes. I need all the help I can get, you know. And some of these moments you have to, for me, the only way I could pull it off was like, I need this to be me. You know, I'm not a good enough actor to be somebody else. I need it to be me. So if I can get it into my head that what I'm about to say as my character is me in that situation, then it feels real to me. And so that's how I did it.
Obviously, you're a little bit more well versed on the stand-up side of things and acting, serious or otherwise. And Loudermilk is a great example of a dark comedy, by the way, for anybody who's curious to check out more. You can find it on Netflix. It's one of the top shows as it currently stands, and Brian's role only increases over the course of the 3 seasons. Do you seek out notes when you're building a new hour, or are you to a point with your stand-up career where you have a pretty good sense of what's going to work and what's not? Obviously, you have to get up on stage and work at least a little bit of it out, but are you seeking those same sorts of notes out with other stand-ups when you're building an hour?
Stand up wise, I like it to come from my mind. I like it to come from my mind and my point of view. That doesn't, so I, the vast majority of it is coming from somewhere in there. That doesn't mean that if I do a bit somewhere that I'm working with a comedian, they might have a tagline or something, or they might say, well, how about if you say this, or how about if you say that?
Yeah.
And if it fits and it feels like it's consistent with how I think, I'm certainly open to that. And so, yeah, I've gotten lines or little moments, little beats here and there that other comedians have suggested to me that I will incorporate if I feel if it is fitting with how I think anyway. If it's a laugh that would work, but it's not how I think, I wouldn't want to do it.
All right, last question now, Brian. I'm currently reading Moshe Kasher's new memoir, and it's a really great read, entertaining, insightful, and it's based on the premise that there are these 6 different aspects of the life that he's lived that have really shaped who and what he is as a comedian and as a person as well. Is there any one pivotal moment that comes to mind for you from your life that has been instrumental in who and what you are today?
Ooh, there've been a lot of moments in my life. One of the biggest ones for me, career wise, stand up comedy wise, was when I first started auditioning. I had no idea if I could do it. You know, like I auditioned one time and nobody said anything. Like there was a comedy club in Fort Lauderdale, the Comic Strip, and they had an open mic night on Monday nights. I went and auditioned one time, nothing happened. I auditioned another time, nothing happened. After 5 auditions, this guy, Joe Mullen, he ran the club. I didn't know who he was. Came up to me and he's like this short Irish, like no nonsense guy. And he goes, "Hey, can I talk to you in the kitchen?" And I'm like, sure. I knew enough that he must have something to do with the club. And I felt like this is positive. And he brought me into the kitchen. He goes, "Hey, I've been watching you over the last few weeks, and I think you got something. And as far as I'm concerned, you just passed your audition," which was like, I get em- I get emotional thinking about it because it was life changing for me. Here's a guy who ran a comedy club who was giving me the green light to continue in this path that I didn't know whether I was good enough to do it or not. And so I passed the audition that night. He said I could go on every night from then on after the headliners. That's a whole other story. They would throw locals on after the show was over in front of the audience as they were leaving. But that night, when he said that I passed my audition, that was in Fort Lauderdale. I was still living with my parents in Miami. I was driving home that night on cloud nine about what had just happened, and I saw a shooting star that I had never seen a shooting star. A shooting star just went right across my windshield, and I went, if this isn't the most magical moment, so that moment will always live with me.
Dude, thank you for sharing. That was touching. And to say that you're good enough all these years later is obviously the understatement of the decade or maybe the century. He is Brian Regan. You know who he is. He's going to be here in Austin this Sunday, ACL Live at the Moody Theater. There's still a few tickets remaining. Go to the acllive.com now to snag those because they will be completely gone by the time we get to Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon. Brian, real pleasure, man. Thank you so much for the time today, and best of luck with the trip through Texas.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you, and thanks for chatting with me.
Thanks to Gentleman Jesus for the intro and outro music. For more of his work, go to his website at gentlemanjesus.com. Thanks to you for hanging out. For more of the show and to connect on social media, visit booksonpod.com. Talk to you next time on Books on Pod.